So we started this cycle of seminars last year with 8 meetings that were only online, of course, due to the situations, but we are very happy to have a real group of people here. That is, yes, I would say that the room is quite full, and it's very, very nice to see you all. But also we are happy to have you all online. And today we are going to focus on another topic that is a cutting-edge topic in environmental sustainability and international cooperation, that is agri-food supply chain. And for that, we have 2 speakers, Professoressa Emanuela Bozzini, here next to me, and online we have Maria Giulia Pelosi. We will introduce the topic with Professoressa Bozzini, talking about sustainable agriculture globally and locally. And then Maria Giulia will present us her experience in an international cooperation context, specifically in Ecuador. So I will leave the stage now to Professoressa Bozzini, and you have around 20 minutes for your presentation, and we will keep the questions for the end of the 2 presentations.
Okay, I'm not sure this is working.
Wait, I have to share the screen.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay.
Okay, and now if you use
Okay. So thanks a lot. Thanks a lot for inviting me to this series. I'm very glad to be here, and I will talk about a very broad topic: sustainability in agriculture at the global and local level. I will provide a very broad overview of the main debate around this issue, and I will leave the Q&A time for the opportunity to go more in depth on the topics you are more interested in. So I will first start with a very broad overview, and this is a main summary. I will talk about the indications about what is called the food crisis current that we are facing, and then I will have a very quick overview of what's in the literature and also among practitioners, including people in international cooperation, are discussing about the roots of the food crisis. So what are the causes, the factors behind that, the drivers of it? And then I will look at the different effects of the food crisis in different locations, particularly in poor countries. And then I will also have a very quick overlook of what is discussed as possible solutions to the food crisis, of the way out. And first, there is this basic idea that the global food system is in crisis. And this is a rather relatively new problem, because for decades, literally from the end of Second World War to 10 years ago, more or less, the situation of the agricultural system at the global level was really unproblematic. Food production was rising constantly. The number of people that are food insecure were constantly decreasing. And so therefore, for example, hunger in the world was indeed a very dramatic situation, but a situation for which we all had a solution. So we know that the people know, the experts, but also government knew that we were on the right path to solve this issue. And indeed, if you look at the Sustainable Development Goal, one of the most important in this context is zero hunger. It was a very optimistic view that you could really eliminate hunger from the world in a couple of decades. Okay, so it was very shared view about this possibility. Now we are talking about the food crisis, at least in the last 10 years. And one of the main reasons and the main indicators why we are talking about food crisis at the global level is because of this trend in the global food prices. So if you look at the graph, this is you have to take that the baseline is the early 2000 and 2001, the average food prices. And if you look at the trends, you can see that starting from 2007-8, they started to increase dramatically and also to fluctuate quite a lot. And this is the average prices for all commodities recorded by FAO. But if we could go more in detail on some basic commodities like rice, you would observe that the
increase in the price is fivefold in a couple of years. It means that a very staple food for Asian people, the price for that basic commodity increased quite a lot, putting a lot of people in a condition of food insecurity. And as you can see, this situation has not been solved in the last 10 years. So the prices are still very high, still right now at the double level compared to 20 years ago. And this graph goes only to 2020, so it does not take into account the effect of the pandemic, which is likely to be very dramatic. And also is not taking into account, of course, the potential effect of the war in Ukraine, because as you know, probably read the newspaper because it's debated daily. In practice, Russia and Ukraine produces around 30% of global cereals, and therefore, if they don't put this on the global market, a number of countries that are highly dependent from these cereals will be really in trouble. So the situation has started to become very problematic 10, 12 years ago, and still is. And so we are starting to talk in academic circles, but also in policy circles, of course, about this idea of food crisis, which is not completely shared. There are people around the world that do not think that we are really in a food crisis. I put here in this slide two very opposed views. There are the two poles of the debate that you can find. On the one hand, there are people like the CEO of Cargill, which is a big multinational company that in agri-food, that simply do not think that we are having a problem of production and problem in agriculture. So if the question is, can the world feed itself? The answer is yes, with no problem, now and in the future. And then on the other side, you have people like Lester Brown, which is a sort of Cassandra in this debate, that says that we are on the verge of collapse and really we are about to starve. We all are about to starve. So it's very polarized debate. And in the middle, between these two poles, you can find a very broad range of positions, of political positions. And that's why I was saying that if I said at the beginning that the global food production was not problematic in political terms, in policy terms, now is really a very hot debate on that. It's debated at all territorial levels and the United Nations, but also European Union and also the national and local level, and particularly in countries that are still developing and are in condition of food insecurity. So what can we say between these two poles about the food crisis? What we know for certain is that, as I said, the number of people in hunger that suffer hunger constantly decreased from the early 70s to 10 years ago. And as being a big success in many contexts. For example, as you can see in Asia, the number of people that are food insecure, meaning that they do not have enough food or do not have enough money to buy food, decreased from 40% to 10%. In Latin America also from 20 to 10% to 12%. And in Africa, it remained constant. So the number of food insecure people was 30% and still is. Despite, and all this, despite the demographic trends that are increasing. So the population was much smaller, the world population was much smaller 50 years ago. And so we had a decrease in the number of food insecure people, despite the number of people on the planet increased quite dramatically. So it was, as I said, a success story until 10 years ago. Now, if we look at the number of people in absolute terms, but also in relative terms, number of food insecure people, you will say that the trend has reversed. So the number of undernourished people is increasing again, everywhere, more or less, and particularly in sub-Saharan Africa. So the zero hunger goal that I mentioned briefly is out of track. So we know now that we will not be able to achieve zero hunger by 2030, which was the so-called the deadline. And why is it so? As I said, we will discuss briefly the reasons for that. And if you look at the debate, there is no consensus And there are a huge number of factors that have been said are the drivers for this. Here on these slides, there are the main ones, like declining productivity. So the planet has a limit on the of the tons of cereals that can produce, tons of fruits. So we are reaching this limit. So the productivity is declining. We are not keeping pace, particularly with demographic trends. So we are not producing enough. Then the second is that we are simply too many. We know that we are between 7 and 8 billions. We will be 9 billions by mid-century. And so we need a lot of food, much more food, and also different food, because we no longer eat basic staple food like cereals, but an increasing number of people, particularly with the rise of middle class in China and BRICS country, Brazil, India, China, etc. In this country, they rightly so, they want to eat protein, they want sugar, etc. So there is a nutrition transition, meaning that we need more food to produce meat compared to producing cereals. Then we have a big causes that are about the working of markets, of global markets, and protectionist policies that are making the chain and the distribution of food across the world inefficient. We'll see that. And then we have this big debate on biofuels, for example. A lot of corn is diverted, for example, to produce biofuel, and there are incentives to that, both from the European Union and the United States. And then there is the effect of climate change that I know that some of you are studying in particular, that it's giving problems to food production, particularly in some areas, including the Mediterranean area. So when it goes to the reasons for this food crisis, there is a lot of debate and many different drivers. People are fighting, scholars are fighting. Different churches, I would say, among them. And indeed, this slide shows the global cereal production. As you can see, from the early 60s, let's say, to 10 years ago, it was constantly increasing. So we have been able, as a planet, we say, as a number of agricultural system, to produce more and more. And this is the reason why a lot of people, as I said before, were no longer food insecure in the world. So this is the main reason. So we have been able to produce more compared to keep pace with the growing world population. And but at the end of the trend here, on the end of the graph, this is not, it shows that production is still rising. We have never produced so much on the planet, but we are no longer keeping pace with the increase in the world population. So this is one of the main problem. And this is going to get worse. I don't want to be too negative, actually, but this is the projections and the scenario for the population as studied by the United Nations. So and as you can see, the world population is expected to reach 11 billion people by the end of the century, or 10 billion people by mid of the century. And also, as you can see from the graph, the distribution of this increase in the population is really diverse. So we, in Europe and in America, in Latin America, North and South America, we are decreasing. So we are getting older and less and less. And also the population in Asia, which is the red bar, is expected still to increase by mid-century, but then to stabilize. So growth is not infinite, of course. But the population in Africa is projected to increase and to double by the end of the century. And this is where the problem of hunger is also located. So this is really where the main problem is. They are not producing enough, and they are still growing in terms of absolute number of people. So this is the reason why the food crisis is a real crisis, because where production should be located, there is not production, and the population is still growing. So this is quite clear. Nobody is denying that. And if you look at these trends and what it means in terms of food production, it means that we should increase to meet this increase in the number of people. We should increase the current level of production by 70%, which is huge. And that's why I was saying that the graph shows that it's not really reasonable to say that the cereal production or the staple food production is keeping pace with population. Because to keep pace with the trends in population and, as I will say, in diets, the shift in diets, we should produce 70% more than current levels. So this is why the idea of food crisis has some leverage. And as I said, it's not only that we are many more on the planet, we are also eating in a different way. If you look at, I don't have the time, but if you just look at the data from Faustat, that you can click the link, I can leave you the slides afterwards, and look at the data on meat consumptions. You look at which is an increase exponential, which has exponential increase, particularly in Asia, with the exception of India, of course, where for cultural, religious regions they are mainly vegetarian, but everywhere else, including Africa, where the wealthy segment of the population can afford meat, the consumption of meat is increasing. And therefore, this nutrition transition combined with the demographic trends means that we should produce much more. And to come to the debate very quickly on the solution, I don't want to make a big story very too simplistic because too short to say, but they say that for decades, the main approach to this issue of food production was to facilitate self-sufficiency. So we had the Green Revolution that you probably are aware of, which means that the attempt to produce more with the agro-industrial method, monocultures, and a lot of agrochemicals, and that made possible the increase in food production that I showed earlier. So that was the reason why we had this trend in cereal production, for example. So it was a very success story and was linked to the idea that each nation has to achieve self-sufficiency in food production. And this worked quite well in Europe, in America, in Asia also, but not in Africa for a number of reasons, including the idea that the Green Revolution was not based on the traditional food that have in Africa. It was exogenous as an attempt. They have no access to markets, so it's difficult. They have no access to agrochemicals that in the context of the Green Revolution farming methods, it's essential. They have no irrigation. So in practice, the Green Revolution there failed. And therefore, once this was evident to everybody at some point, they decided that the policymakers in the early 80s decided that self-sufficiency was no longer a goal as a policy, but that global trade should be better to achieve a more efficient way to distribute food. And therefore, at that point, from the 80s to maybe now or 10 years ago, the idea was that each country should not become self-sufficient, so produce everything to feed their own population, but each country should specialize on the crops that are better suited to their agroecological conditions, and then trade on the global market that specific crop. So, for example, if in Brazil it's fantastic for growing coffee, then they should specialize in that, and then sell it on the global market, and with the money buy from the global market the crops that they are not able to produce. And the idea was, if everybody did that, we will have a global market which is very efficient. And this, in theory, could work. In practice, it didn't, for a number of reasons that we can't really explore here, that we explore later. And one of the effects of this approach to global food security was to make poor countries, and in particular sub-Saharan countries, completely dependent from the global markets. And if you see their capacity to export contrasted to their capacity to the need for imports, if you see the trends, they are really diverging. So from the mid-80s and very much in the last few years, their dependency from the global markets increased quite dramatically. And this is why they are so vulnerable to fluctuation in global food prices. This is why the number of food insecure people in Nigeria or in sub-Saharan Africa in general is increasing, okay, because they are dependent from food that is increasingly expensive for them. So this is a very big problem. And once this became evident, now they are discussing policy circles. Another approach, so it's a little bit changing. Under the term right to food, for example, we are coming back to some idea of self-sufficiency and diversification of production. And we also have a neo-productivist agenda, meaning that there is this idea that we should produce more, but we should produce in a very diversified way in different locations with methods that are tailored to the specific conditions of local communities, etc. So this is now what they are discussing the most. And linked to that, and I want to mention simply because it's very popular in international cooperation, but also by social movements, etc. Linked to that, there is a big reaction from local communities that are advocating for the concept of food sovereignty. I don't know if you heard of that, which is basically the idea that each community, each nation, this is not clear what they mean exactly, but anyway, has the right to produce their own food according to their local traditions, etc. This idea is emerging quite strongly, particularly, as I said, among social movements. I mentioned this slide, La Via Campesina, which is a network of farmers, small farmers around the world. But in Italy, the organizations that are advocating for this approach are mainly, for example, Slow Food, that you heard of probably. And therefore, this is important for a lot of people working at local level in the context of international cooperation. So I just mentioned that because of its importance for the debate. Of course, it's as a concept is a bit slippery, but I don't want to enter this now. And so this is more or less how the debate is developing in this context around the idea of right to food, of producing more with taking into account local conditions and need, and at the same time to take into account this idea of food sovereignty, so self-determination. And I have a final slide about the impact of the pandemic, which again is very polarized, the debate on that. On the one hand, the pandemic showed that the system is very vulnerable, but on the other, there are people saying that, for example, the OECD, that indeed the food system proved very resilient, which is basically true for wealthy countries like us. We had probably shortages for a couple of weeks in supermarkets. If you remember, we couldn't find pasta, probably, yeah, and that's it. But we can't really say that we suffered hunger. But this is not entirely true in other countries, because, as I said, particularly in countries that are dependent from imports, the pandemic had a huge effect. And I want to stop here. I don't know how many, if I run too late. Okay. And I'm open to, as I said, my purpose was to give you a very broad overview of this. These are thousands of pages, literally. And if you have any question, I'm happy to go more in depth on specific issues. Thanks. Okay.
Thank you. Okay, thank you. It was quite dense and full. I'm sure we have a lot of inputs to discuss together. And just to add some more, now we can leave the stage to Maria Giulia, who will introduce her experience in Accra with his civil service experience. And so you should be able to share the screen, Maria Giulia, now.
Yes.
Okay. So,
can you see my screen and can you hear me well?
yes.
Okay, perfect. So, okay, good afternoon, everyone. And first of all, let me thank Professor Zortea and all the other organizers for inviting me at this event. Today, I'm going to talk with you about the relevance of the improvement in sustainability and climate resilience in the agricultural supply chain as a response to ecosystem degradation and poverty. We will explore the case of Ecuador, where I'm currently living in the framework of the Italian civil service. Indeed, nowadays, most agri-food supply chains in developing countries, such as Ecuador, are suffering from unsustainable production practices that are leading to increasing pressures on ecosystems and at the same time are not contributing to the social and economic development of rural communities. Therefore, after presenting you the general context and the most relevant aspect concerning the production of agricultural commodities in Ecuador, I will show you some projects that the organization I'm working for have been implemented to counteract these problems. I'd like to start by giving you an overview of the geography of this country, which will help you to physically frame the concepts I'm going to talk about. Ecuador is split down the middle by the Andes, the longest continental mountain range in the world. And this natural division creates three geographic regions that are the Andes, la Sierra, the Pacific Coast, la Costa, the Amazon, el Oriente or la Amazonia, and additionally the Galapagos archipelago makes the fourth region. All these regions are characterized by an immense variety of climates, territories, and species, which makes Ecuador one of the most biodiverse countries in the world, as also Darwin realized. However, despite its abundance in natural resources, the country is threatened by several environmental problems, such as pollution, deforestation, overexploitation of natural resources, desertification, and loss of biodiversity, which are caused by human activity and exacerbated by the effects of climate change, which result in the degradation and disappearance of natural landscapes. The main causes of these are the oil and mining activities, but especially agriculture, which will be the subject of our analysis. In Ecuador, agriculture accounts for less than 14% of the GDP, but still employs 1/3 of the working population. The main production in the Sierra are traditional polycultures such as maize, quinoa, beans, and potatoes, while on the coast predominates crops for export such as cocoa, coffee, bananas, and palm oil. Ecuadorian agriculture is mainly of small producers, who represents approximately 84% of the farmers in the country and are mainly dedicated to family farming activities. By family farming, we mean a production and exchange system based on family work with the aim of securing family livelihood. This type of agriculture can also be communal, and production is usually oriented towards self-consumption and the market. Indeed, it represents the basis of food sovereignty in the country, producing more than 70% of the food consumed in Ecuador. Also, the current pandemic of coronavirus, as highlighted, it's important, since the health crisis could not have been managed if production from small-scale farming had been interrupted. In parallel with this, family farming is also considered to be a way of life and a culture, since ancestral knowledge of agriculture and indigenous medicine have always been a distinctive features of Ecuadorian people. In this agriculture, women play an essential role because they take on the double workload of managing the family production unit and carrying out agricultural activities. However, despite their key role in the society, family farmers don't have the support they need to develop and suffer from an unjust distribution of land, since they control only 20% of the national agricultural area. In addition, access to basic services is poor, which is reflected in the multidimensional poverty rate, which is 71% for rural areas compared to the 23% of the urban area. Another thing it's important to notice is that although in principle, the one of small producers should be a biodiverse production unit which maintains a balance with the ecosystem in which it operates, In practice, we will see that it's not always the case, especially when traditional practices are lost in the competition with the standards of large-scale agricultural industries. In this competition, family farmers almost always come out the losers, no matter the environmental cost that the large-scale monocultures generates compared to the ecosystem services that family farming provides. Indeed, intensive industrial monocultures generate negative impacts both on the environment, on human and animal health, and on food sovereignty. The impact on the environment is undoubtedly the most profound problem because it generates loss of agrobiodiversity and the degradation of natural ecosystem, increasing the risk of pests, destroying nutrients in the soil, and weakening the capacity to adapt to climate change. In addition, intensive farming practices require a large amount of water to irrigate crops, jeopardizing the availability of water resources in the country that are already threatened by the effects of pollution and climate change. Therefore, the disruption of natural balances leads to the overuse of agrochemicals, such as fertilizer, pesticides, and fungicides, with the resulting high environmental and social cost. Indeed, these chemicals are discharged into the river, infiltrate the underground aquifer, pollute the air, and cause further soil depletion. Moreover, the industrial monocultures in Ecuador, accompanied by the activities of the oil, mining, and livestock industries, have also meant the total or partial substitution of native forests where they've been installed. Indeed, according to the Ministry of the Environment, almost 95,000 hectares of forest are lost each year, with several consequences such as loss of biodiversity, depletion of water resources, soil erosion, and alteration of biochemical balance. This has also aggravated social problems with negative impact either on food sovereignty and on the rights of indigenous communities living in the forest, like in the Amazon, who have witnessed the destruction of their natural habitats. In addition, the main industrial monocultures in Ecuador, such as cocoa, coffee, bananas, and African palm, have led to the concentration of land in the hands of a small number of family, with serious repercussions on thousands of small producers affected by falling prices on the national and international market, with the result that only the most economically powerful producers survive, even enlarging their properties at the expenses of the failure of small producers. The pressure to survive also forces extremely poor people living in or near tropical forests to convert certain forest area into agricultural systems in order to find other spaces for crops, which cause a further loss of vegetation. Another negative aspect is that the big companies of monoculture plantations, such as palm oil, do not respect workers' rights and exploit local communities without creating any benefits. For example, in the province of Esmeraldas, where 40% of the plantation of the oil palm in Ecuador is located, almost 73% of the people do not have the means to meet their basic needs, and 1/3 of the inhabitants lives in extreme poverty. This condition forces these desperate people to sell their land to the oil palm industries for short-term profit, which further deprives them of the means of subsistence and resources for live and develop. Another big paradox that I wanted to mention is that around the 60s, a compensatory reforestation campaign was launched in order to offset the effect of deforestation. However, this was based on exotic species such as eucalyptus and pinus, which have been planted just for the economic purpose of supplying timber, and not only do not belong to the natural ecosystem of Ecuador, but also require huge amounts of water resources, taking them away from endemic species. But beside industrial monoculture, another challenge for family agriculture are the effects of climate change. In fact, climate change is considered to be one of the most threatening phenomena worldwide for agriculture, especially for the lives of farmers with scarce economic resources and opportunities. In Ecuador, the most evident effects of climate change that affect agricultural productivity and therefore the income of rural families and their food security are the reduction of glaciers, which compromises water availability, the alterations in precipitation patterns, which affects agricultural calendars, the increasing frequency of extreme weather events such as frost, drought, high rainfall, and floods, the spread of pests and the loss of arable land and crops, and the increase in temperature, which allows agricultural practices at higher altitude, with the negative consequence of reducing the surface area of the Andean ecosystem. At the same time, agriculture is also a significant contributor to climate change through the emission of gases from the use of agrochemical on crops. Therefore, intervening on the sustainability and resilience of the agricultural commodity sector is really a way to contribute to several crucial issues which will define the future well-being of both the people and the planet, contributing to the achievement of several sustainable development goals of the 2030 Agenda. Among the practices that strengthen the resilience to climate change of small-scale farming systems is the adoption of an agroecological production system. Agroecology is defined as a science and a set of practices in which two disciplines converge, agronomy and ecology. It is a sustainable agricultural practice that contributes to the conservation of agrobiodiversity, the improvement in environmental quality, and the reduction of rural poverty. Agroecology considers farm as a complex system in which the balance is given by the synergies between living organisms, such as the soil, plants, animals, and humans. Some of the principles of agroecology include the adaptation to local conditions, the holistic management of the agrosystem, and the use of organic fertilizers and pesticides. Agroecology is also a form of food production that prioritizes cultural appropriation and collective forms of social organization, revaluing traditional systems and practices of rural communities. Indeed, in the Andean region, farmers are familiar with agroecological practices that draw on traditional knowledge developed since pre-Inca time. And some of these practices include polyculture, the management of organic matter, and the rotation of crops year after year. These practices have a significant advantage over negative conventional industrial farming and give a positive responses to food security, social inequality, environmental damage, and climate change. For all these reasons, the international cooperation in Ecuador have been implementing several projects mainstreaming agroecology and ecosystem conservation to work toward the joint improvement of people living conditions and the quality of the environment. An example of this is the project Andean Resilience that have been implemented by the Italian NGO ACRA. This project belonged to the European program Euroclima Plus and is related to the implementation of agroecological, political, and financial strategies to strengthen the resilience to climate change of small-scale agricultural systems. The intervention targets 4 Andean provinces, 3 in Ecuador and 1 in Peru, that are characterized by a large portion of paramo ecosystem and are inhabited by vulnerable communities from an economic and climate perspective that are mostly indigenous, dedicated to family farming activities. The project had the purpose of ensuring the control of the agricultural frontier and the conservation of the paramo ecosystem services against the local effects of climate change, deforestation, land use change, and misuse of chemicals. Indeed, the paramo provides several important services, such as the regulation of water cycle, high biodiversity, carbon sequestration, and oxygen production, and also tourism, but is suffering a strong degradation that is affecting the entire population, but especially the agricultural sector. Therefore, to overcome these problems, the project proposed a strategy that is based on 4 components. The first one is related to the agroecological production and is focused on training and implementation of good and culturally appropriate practices in family agriculture that are based on sustainable use of water, carbon, soil, and waste management. Trainings also address the organizational aspects of the producer association and the marketing of products. The second component focuses on strengthening the local government capacity to elaborate climate change plans according to the nationally determined contribution, the national climate change strategies, and the national development plan. This component include also the definition and implementation of monitoring and evaluation system for adaptation measures based on climate change indicators and action prioritized in the local plan. The third component is related to the strengthening and consolidation of replicable financial mechanisms based on adaptation and mitigation strategies directed to the rural sector to support sustainable agricultural initiatives that are linked to the paramo and to natural resources conservation. This also provides support and sustainability to climate change adaptation action and local plans. Finally, the last component is related to the spread and replication of good practices and lessons learned. Therefore, the project focuses on the strengthening a management and production model based on public-private community relations, participations, inclusion, and gender equity, promoting at the same time the value of ancestral and traditional knowledge. In this framework, capacity building has been promoted at different levels, from small producers association to local and regional government to other actors involved in the water, agricultural, and environmental field. This to contribute to the empowerment of beneficiaries and ensuring their active participation in the definition of local strategies. Another project that the ACRA is being implemented to foster socioeconomic development through sustainable agriculture is the cocoa heritage. Indeed, cocoa is the third most important agricultural export product in Ecuador, and nationally there are more than 100,000 production units that 80% of which belong to small producers. Among the type of cocoa, the fine aroma is one of the most demanded in the international market, and Ecuador accounts for more than 50% of the world production. Therefore, the objective of the project is to promote a systemic model for the production chain of high-quality organic fine aroma cocoa that is based on innovation, socio-environmental sustainability, and on the technical and commercial alliance between small producers, universities, local government, and private companies. The project is being implemented in the coastal provinces of Esmeraldas and Manabí, where cocoa is a relevant activity in the generation of employment, but still fails to foster development, inclusion, and incomes for small producers. Indeed, the productivity of cocoa cultivation in the intervention areas is low due to the inadequate land management, poor production practices, and the lack of new technology to counteract environmental degradation. This also allows for the settlement of intensive industry of species that are harmful to the ecosystem, causing losses of natural resources and biodiversity. The product also lacks added value, and therefore the commercial potential of cocoa is limited. In addition, associative realities are weak and the participation of women is low. This fragility of the association leads to a poorly structured marketing system, which in turn facilitates sales to intermediaries at prices that do not respect the quality of the product. For this reason, the project promotes the recovery of the centrality of small producers and their associations in the value chain, enhancing public-private alliances for the benefit of the producer. In order to achieve this objective, the project proposed a strategy based on 4 components which contribute to all the links in the value chain. The first component aims to strengthen the capacity of small producers to implement a sustainable management of land based on agroforestry systems. This will contribute on the one hand to increase their productivity and profitability, and on the other hand to conserve biodiversity, protect the soil, and prevent the contamination of watersheds. Indeed, once again, the practices to strengthen farm production are based on agroecological criteria. The second component is focusing on strengthening socio-organizational processes and management capacities of small producers association, also supporting non-organized producers by creating commercial links with the association and private companies. The third component instead addresses the improvement in post-harvest processes on which the quality of cocoa strongly depends. And this will be done through training, technological innovation, and research in alliance with academy in order to reach the standards required by international market. Finally, the last component is related to the promotion of exports and the positioning of finished product in markets that recognize the high quality of cocoa and its cultural and heritage value. The methodology of the action is based on the creation of development from below, ensuring the participation of all the beneficiaries to guarantee a real appropriation of the initiative. It is also planned to establish a replicable system of capacity building in order to guarantee the continuity and the sustainability in time of the progress achieved. In this framework, the promotion of the role of women and the cultural heritage of cocoa tradition are cross-cutting themes that directly benefit producers and add value to marketing. Well, to conclude my presentation, I've been asked to tell you a little bit more about my personal experience because, like many of you here, I studied engineering with the dream of applying what I was learning in the field of international cooperation. So although I'm still at the beginning of my professional life and I still have a lot of things to learn, I hope to provide you with some insight that might help you to steer your own path once you leave university. As I said, I graduated in the Master of Science of Environmental Engineering at the Polytechnico di Milano, taking also part of the honors program Engineering for Sustainable Development. That was a parallel training program aimed to enhance the cross-discipline skills of future engineering in the field of sustainable development. During my studies, I had the opportunity to deepen my knowledge on themes such as climate change, environmental remediation, and natural resources conservation, tackled through a multi-scale approach. I also had the opportunity to better understand all the aspects of complexity that concern the analysis and management of environmental systems. And I've learned how to use modeling and optimization tools to support planning and decision-making processes. In this regard, I developed my master thesis on the joint optimization of water and energy resources under climate change. And I had the chance to publish an article about the effects of hydrological changes on cooperation in transnational catchment, analyzed through the game theory perspective. But in parallel with my engineering study, I've always been attracted also by the themes of social development and international cooperation. And for this reason, after graduating, I attended the second-level Master in Cooperation for Development at the University of Pavia, in which I investigated in a multicultural and multidisciplinary environment all the social, economic, political, and historical aspects concerning sustainable development and international cooperation, also exploring the more practical side of the project cycle management. To supplement my learning, I also attended the course Environment and Climate Change in International Cooperation, promoted by the VIS Advanced Training School, where I first met Professor Zortea, and in which I explored the benefit of the environmental mainstreaming approach in international cooperation projects. After completing my didactic part of the master in Pavia, I've done an internship with the Italian NGO COPI in Ecuador in a project that was focused on improving wash facilities and capacities as a response to COVID-19 emergency. For wash, I mean water, sanitation, and hygiene, just to be clear. In this context, I had the opportunity to put into practice what I studied during university. And therefore, I've learned how to implement and monitor project activities, writing reports, support the logistics of an intervention, and also write new project proposals. I also had the chance to carry out capacity building activities on WASH topics. Then I started my experience with the Italian Civil Service, where I'm currently working. As I said before, I am with the Italian NGO ACRA, again in Ecuador, and I'm working on two projects, one related to climate resilience agriculture that I mentioned before, and another one related to the strengthening of human and institutional capacities of civil society organizations. These two projects are giving me the chance to learn and spread new and ancestral techniques in the field of environmental conservation. And they are also improving my knowledge about the realities of rural communities in the territory, also enhancing my know-how about the implementation of project activities and the interaction with project partners. A particular activity in which I am involved is the dissemination of issues related to environmental pollution, climate change, and sustainable agriculture, both through capacity building seminars and through the drafting of manuals. Indeed, although I recognize the importance of employing the art skills and the expertise provided by university, I also think it's fundamental, once in the field, to go beyond technicalities and concentrate on experience sharing and the transferring of methodologies and tools, which I believe is really at the heart of the empowerment of the beneficiaries, since it improved their sense of responsibility towards society, and at the same time, it reduced their dependence on external aid and competencies. To conclude, both my professional, academic, and personal experiences taught me that a real sustainable development could be reached only by considering individual, social, and environmental wellness inseparably linked. For this reason, analyzing the world requires a combination of technical, social, environmental, economic, and political perspective, among many others, since it is a complex and ever-changing system whose individual parts must be understood and contextualized within the whole. Therefore, to promote sustainable development, a system thinking approach must be adopted in order to embrace this complexity and holistically optimize socioeconomic and environmental co-benefits for a proper valorization of human and environmental resources at different scales and across different cultures. Thank you very much for the attention.
Thank you, Maria Giulia. Okay, now we are full of hints and information, and I'm sure that all of us have a lot of stuff going on in our minds. So if someone wants to break the ice and has some questions to go to the speakers, you are welcome, both online or here in the room. Feel free. Just one logistic aspect. I will ask you to give priority to question to Professoressa Bozzini, since at 7 o'clock she has to leave, so maybe we can make a question directly to her in advance, or if you have a question for both, let's go also with them. Okay, thank you.
Hello, do you hear me? Can I break the ice? Do you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, yes, thank you very much. The two interventions were really interesting. In particular, I would like to ask a question to the Professor Bozzini. I found it really interesting, let's say, the historical framework that you showed us, going from the Green Revolution to the specialized and global market policy following the years. And so we, like as humankind, we faced both the limit of these two approaches. And so my question, as well to relate with the intervention of Maria Giulia, is if you have a personal opinion on how should we face the problem of food insecurity, like of course it's a really big topic, but if you could give us some example on what maybe how the society should change, how the economy should change in order to face this problem. May, for instance, agroecology and small households, agriculture be a solution or part of the solution, or what is your general opinion? Thank you very much. Too tough, maybe, too general.
Well, if I can start, well, it's an impossible question to answer, to be honest. But I think that one thing that in sociology or social sciences, managerial and political science, it's very clear is that we cannot have one-fits-all solutions. And if you see what happened with the Green Revolution, it was a single model applied almost everywhere, and it didn't work, and not work everywhere, at least. And also the global trade, it worked quite well for a number of communities around the world, but not everywhere. So again, you don't, when you have a single-minded approach to issues, this is going to fail. So therefore, I very much agree with what Maria Giulia said that before, that at the end, you have to focus on specific locations, study them from different point of view, technical, but also social, political, to figure out what could work well in that specific context. And it might be that cocoa production for global market is good for a community in Ecuador. And that would be an approach very close to the ones I mentioned on global production, global trade, the neoliberal agenda, etc. Or it might be that indeed a very localized small production based on family farms, etc., is very productive, or it's good for achieving self-sufficiency in a particular area. But what I would say is that you can't really say that from starting from assumption that are very often ideological assumption of what works and what it doesn't work. And a lot of analysis, particularly interdisciplinary analysis, I think it's the only solution that we should push in my view. I also seen in my experience that we are running this honors program Talete in the University of Trento, which is a cooperation between the department, the DICAM here, engineering, and the Department of Sociology and Social Research and the Center for International Cooperation. And when we match engineers, students in engineering and students in sociology, going the same place, doing a dissertation that are from different points of view, take the same issue, it works very well. I think it's very effective and very enriching for everybody. So I answer without answering.
No, thank you very much.
I don't know if Giulia would like to add something. Can you hear us, Giulia? Yes, your microphone is okay.
Okay, yeah. Now I hear.
Yeah.
Right, the connection.
Would you like to have you had the chance to listen the question that Nicola asked to you?
Sorry,
did you listen the question that Nicola asked to you both?
Okay, I thought it was just for Professor.
Oh yeah. Just if you would like to add something, or you have some other considerations.
Well, I think my view is also a partial view because, of course, I'm working with Small Farmers Association, and I do see the importance and the benefit of this type of small-scale agriculture for the development of the community. Of course, this, as Professor said, is something that has to be contextualized within different realities. So maybe in Ecuador, in the realities I'm seeing and I'm working with, is something that really works and is really a way to giving them also a sustainability in self-consumption and also independence with the market. So yeah, this is my opinion.
Thank you.
Thank you. So do we have other questions, considerations, or stuff that you would like to share?
There is one question in the chat. I don't know.
Oh, okay. Sorry, I wasn't able to track it. I will open it.
Okay, maybe I can raise my hand with.
Yes, of course,
show
please.
myself on as well. Okay, I think you should be able to see me. Not sure about it, but in any case, yeah, I actually wrote the questions to make it easier, maybe to understand or take your time. I was just a little bit curious about the technical aspects. You mentioned that has been done and conducted some research, which is a part that actually I'm very interested into. So you especially mentioned post-harvest techniques. So can you tell me a little bit more, or can you tell us a little bit more about your findings and if you were managed? Because I know that sometimes these kind of projects are very short, so they don't allow much research to be done. But which kind of research did you conduct, and did you had any interesting results? Thank you very much.
Well, thanks for the question. I have to do a little specification because I'm not directly working in the project of cocoa. I'm working in the one of resilient agriculture and in another one that is related to the strengthening of civil society organization. But of course, I got indirect experience with this project because the colleague of mine are working in this. And the things I can tell you is that we are not conducting research directly because it's the university that is conducting research on post-harvest together with the small farmers. And well, for those who doesn't know, post-harvest process are all the phases regarding the drying and fermentation of cocoa seeds. So the things that the project is doing is working in collaboration with university to find a replicable system for like defining protocols for the control of quality standards for exportation. For example, the control of cadmium and the presence of heavy metals. And these are also for improving the traceability of the cocoa production, because of course, many times the prices do not respect the quality of the product because you cannot trace the product and you cannot see that it belongs to an organic farm, a small producer farm. So the project is also helping small producers in obtaining and renewing this certification of organic and small producers for adding value to marketing and to respect with the value the quality of the product.
Thank you. Please.
I have a question for the professor. Can you please go there because the microphone works on the desk. Thank you.
I cannot hear you. I don't know if it's my problem.
At the beginning, the professor said that the CEO of the multinational said that the world can feed itself, but I don't understand why can somebody say it, because it's a political fact, but also there are statistics and so on. So how can somebody say it?
Sorry, can you repeat? Sorry, I don't know if it's my problem, my connection. I didn't understand the question.
The fact
Maybe
that
can you go closer to the mic? Sorry.
How can somebody say that the world can feed itself when the statistics don't say so? So I understand that it's a political debate, but I don't understand how can somebody like a CEO of a multinational can say it.
Well, it's a very interesting question because if you look at the debate, you will find that people starting from the same data reached very different conclusions, so in practice. And the CEO is not the only one saying that there is not a problem in food production. And one of the reasons is that they are very big faith in technological innovation. So they think that even if now we are not keeping pace with, for example, the growing population, etc., the fact that we have a problem as a society, as a global society, will be a very strong incentive to companies, research centers, etc., to improve methods of production, to improve seeds, to improve biotechnology, and to provide all the different means to achieve food production which is sufficient. Therefore, it's a projection that he does, and the people like him does, that is say, we are not having a problem because as a humanity, let's say, when we have a problem, we are also able to take lead and to address it. Okay, so it's and mainly by technological needs, and therefore I think this is the main point and the main reason behind the statement that I mentioned at the beginning.
Also from the online people connected.
Well,
Please.
Maria Giulia.
I think that you can hear.
Hi, thank you for your presentation. Sorry for my English. I want to ask you a question about your experience in Accra and your project that you follow. If there were some issues, some problems and difficulties about to achieve this transition of the social and ecological change of the beneficiaries, and also which strategies they use to achieve this change. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for the question. Actually, there were many difficulties because, of course, when you work in the field with different people in different contexts, there are always some unforeseen events. But especially the pandemic that have slowed down the implementation of the project a lot. But in the end, we managed to close this project in this December. Now we are just working for the audit process. And yeah, actually, we managed to achieve our results, and we managed also to start a course with the university in Ecuador about the strategies of adaptation and mitigation to climate change. So give a capacity building, not just at the level of small producers, but at different level, so that also the civil society organization, the people, and also all the actors that can decide about local strategies can intervene in this issue. But we didn't have actually for what matter the definition of which study we use for implement these activities that we planned. I don't know, I'm not very conscious because this project had been written more than 2 years ago, and I just arrived in August, and I find basically the project that have been already implemented. I just follow the activities in the field, the last activities in the field. But of course, we worked in collaboration with the local government, the provincial government, and with technicals, technicals that study agronomy engineering for the definition of the best practice in the territory. And we also conduct a diagnostic about the analysis of risk and vulnerabilities of the small associations for defining the best practices. So it was really a work in itinere in which the definition of the best practice had been done together with the people and contextualizing the reality in which we were intervening. This will then also these small scale local plans for adaptation and mitigation of climate change also served as an input for the definition also to the regional and provincial plans of adaptation to climate change.
Thank you. Okay, you have another question for you.
Hi. I have a question from a technician to a technician, let's say. And my question is regarding the data, because it's a big issue for, international cooperation projects, because when you arrived, you don't know nothing about the context, and you have to deal with looking for the data and trying to, collaborate with local partners, which are not always aware about the sources, the data sources, data sets, etc. And furthermore, there are many problems with technical equipment and, also weather stations. And so my question is, how did you deal with this problem? Thank you.
Thanks so much. Yeah, we collaborate also not only with local government and association, but we also have a contract with some experts of adaptation and mitigation strategies to the small context. So they help us to conduct this diagnostic phase and also to draw down the local plans for adaptation and mitigation. So of course, the data always lack. There is also always a lack of data because, for example, the weather stations are almost not existent here in Ecuador, or they're not really reliable. So we give the work, let's say, to these experts that study these local contexts from a different perspective. There was a climate expert, an expert on gender, that draw these local plans also with a gender perspective. So not only tackling climate change, not only tackling the social economic reality of this association and the community in which they were intervening, but also a gender perspective. So yeah, actually, I saw this diagnostic when they were already realized, and I studied them, and they have been based on interview on climate projections, but yeah, based on this analysis they developed.
Thank you. Very interesting for witnessing data and recreating to try to find them. Some final consideration?
Actually, I have a question, if I can.
Yes, please.
For Professor Emanuela Bozzini. Since I'm a genetist, so I'm not very in your world, but do you think GMO can be the solution in order to feed the world, or do you think it is more a problem for the environment? Thanks.
That's an interesting question. I have to say that GMOs are perceived as a major environmental and public health issue, mainly in Europe. This is a very European perception of that, where the European citizens basically rejected this technology in agriculture, not in other fields, like medicine, for example. It's a daily habit, let's say. And so therefore, this idea that the GMOs are really a danger, should not be used, is very much European. Because if you look around the world, they are used in basic practice everywhere. And it's very fast, the adoption of GMOs in many, many contexts. I would say that as it is, the development of GMOs is not really, cannot be really the solution. First, because you have very few products that are engineered for that. They are the staple ones. And also they are in the hands of very few research centers linked to multinational companies. And the concentration in this particular segment of the market is increasing. If you look at the economic development in the last 5 to 10 years, let's say, you see a further concentration of all the agrochemical companies. And now you have in practice 4 big players on the market. So the entire research on that, with the exception of maybe some small research centers around the world, is in the hands of very few companies. So to the extent that they want to address the issue in terms of food security, we are in their hands in practice. So because of that, I'm not sure that it can be the solution to food security. I know that there are research, for example, on rice, etc., that are more directly linked to the issue of food security. So to make it resistant to floods, for example, etc. But so far, all the crops that have been developed are not targeting food security as an issue. And therefore, I'm not sure that the direction is exactly this. So personally,
thank you.
I'm a bit skeptical.
Hi everybody, sorry for the delay. I was teaching Massimo Zortea from UNESCO chair. My gratitude for all the panelists and the public, the audience and the virtual audience, increasing, I see. How many are in connecting now?
33 people.
Thank you so much. My consideration, just to close this meeting, but to invite you to go on, staying in touch, and considering the agricultural issue of this sustainability and the future of humanity is very important, because it's not on a technical, only a technical issue, but it's also a cultural. We have learned by Maria Giulia, but also imagined by Emanuela, that facing this topic only with technical arguments is not sufficient. This is the lesson learned we can take away from this meeting. And apart from the combination of cultural and technical issues, there's another important thing that is raising from this seminar, the importance to considering the fight against vulnerability and the people at risk as important issues, not only the poverty issue. So, for instance, the food security and food sovereignty are connected also with the pandemics, for instance, but not only the COVID-19 crisis, because many other crises have raised in the past, especially in Latin America and in Asian, Southeast Asian countries during the crisis of 1917, 1908, and the Great Recession in 28, 27, 28, in which emerged that agricultural approaches based on industrial production, on GMOs, only thaumaturgic capacities, is not sufficient to tackle the vulnerability great issues. So my wish is to see you again, fighting all together in order to make more sustainable the future of agricultural production in countries like Ecuador, for instance, in which areas like Esmeraldas are at risk, because before they were based on the biodiversity, local biodiversity resources, and now are based on industrial massive production. Very interesting in 3 years perspective, not absolutely not sustainable in 10 years perspective. So I think that we can close this meeting with the wishes to go on in reflecting on how to combine the engineers' approach, the technicians' approach, and the anthropological experts in all the Latin America, but also in Africa, Sub-Saharan Africa. I'm inviting you to stay with us next meeting on 27th April. We will speak about another important topic for engineers, environmental engineers, but only for engineers, the sustainable management of water resources in the context of data scarcity. And we will come back on the conflict based on the scarcity of resources in next the fourth meeting for May, devoted to environmental conflicts. And just to end, in 18 May, right, the last one, on the nature-based solutions, advanced solutions studied also by our colleagues, like Davide Gianoletti and the staff. So I'm inviting you to stay together. Even for you, Manuela, you are the doors is open. Thank you so much, and hope to see you again in 2 weeks, just 2 weeks, 14 days. Thank you, everybody. Goodbye.
Thank you so much.